Coming to you from the shores of gorgeous Lake Michigan, this is home to passionate book lovers everywhere, hosting more than 260 acclaimed authors in 14 years, including best-selling novelists Geraldine Brooks, Ann Patchett, and Mitch Albom. We are live at the historic City Opera House in downtown Traverse City, Michigan. Welcome to the National Writers Series. Tonight, a conversation with Amy Tan, New York Times bestselling author of The Joy Luck Club and several other bestselling books, presenting her new nonfiction, The Backyard Bird Chronicles, with guest host Ed Ronco, news director of Interlochen Public Radio. The National Writers Series couldn't do this without our amazing audience, dedicated volunteers, and talented authors.
I love NWS!
We're also raising writers, offering year-round free creative writing classes to 3rd through 12th grade students across the region.
Thank you, NWS!
Tonight's event is presented to you by the Clark and Karen Bunting Natural Wonders Author Conversations. A special thanks to our media partners Interlochen Public Radio and the Traverse City Record Eagle. And of course our ongoing sponsors, the Green Brick Foundation, Northgard Technology, West Shore Bank, Traverse City Tourism, and the Cherry Capital Airport. And now, NWS co-founder and #1 New York Times bestselling author Doug Stanton and NWS co-founder and executive director Ann Stanton
Good evening.
will introduce tonight's event.
How are all of you? Welcome. Hi, Ann.
Hey, Doug.
It's so great to see a packed house here tonight on Front Street in Traverse City, Michigan, by the shore of Lake Michigan. It's a beautiful night. We're so glad you're here with us to see and hear Amy Tan talk about her new book, The Backyard Chronicles, Backyard Bird Chronicles, and Ed Ronco as well from IPR. Amy's book comes at a good time in her life and in our life where she looks into the mirror of nature and sees for herself a new person, I think, and she'll talk about that on stage, and perhaps sees the future that is different than the one she is looking from at the moment. So we're so glad to have her here. We're so glad to have her live here at the City Opera House to a sold-out audience of readers, and also we have fans from around America and the globe tuning in via our digital broadcast. So thank you for being here.
Before we bring Amy and Ed on stage, I'd like to acknowledge that tonight's event takes place on land cherished and maintained by generations of Indigenous people of the area. I'd also like to acknowledge the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians who reside here today. Thank you. And now, please join me in welcoming Ed Ronco, the news director of Interlochen Public Radio, and the amazing Amy Tan. Thank you.
Well, my goodness, and good evening. We're so glad to be here, and Amy, what a joy it is to be here with you. I'm going to present you with this microphone as a gift right at the start.
Great. I didn't even have to do anything. Thank you.
As folks know, but I just want to go over a little bit of your bio before we begin. You are, of course, an acclaimed author. Many folks know you for the Joy Luck Club. More than 40 weeks, and 40 weeks, atop the New York Times bestseller list. You co-produced and co-screenwrote the movie based on the book. You are also the recipient of many, many awards, but there are two in particular I'd like to mention tonight. In 2022, you were inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Yes. And then just last year, in the beautiful East Room of the White House, President Biden presented you with the National Humanities Medal.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I could ask you what it's like to meet the president, what it's like to be in the White House. Instead I'm going to ask you, is the medal heavy?
The medal, I could use it as a weapon.
Well, the new book, of course, is the Backyard Bird Chronicles, and we are going to talk at length about it tonight, and your journey in writing it, and so much more, and we'll get to some of your questions as well. Before we do that, though, you've brought some images that you'd like to share with us, because the book is replete with beautiful illustrations. And so I think in about 15 minutes or so, we're going to get through as many of these as we can and talk about what they mean.
Okay.
Take it away.
All right. So, the backyard, what is that? This is my backyard. It's a woodland habitat. There are oaks. There's also a place with flowers, succulents, and there's a green roof. That looks like a garden, but there's a green roof there. Lots of water and the bay beyond that. So that is where the birds come, and I think that they really love Amy's Bistro, Natural Bistro. It was landscape for pollinators. I thought that not only the food in the natural environment would be good. I started buying bird food. I started getting GMO free, all this stuff that, I was like a parent of new kids. And then eventually, when there were fledglings, I thought I need to get live mealworms. Now, live mealworms they're not worms. They are the larvae of beetles, and in order to keep them from turning into beetles, which are inedible to birds, I had to put them in the refrigerator. And I started with like 1,000 and 2,000. They were eating those 1,000 a day, so I ended up going to 20,000. This is when I descended into madness. And my husband, who I have been together with for 54 years, you can understand why we are still together, because when I got to 20,000 and put them in the fridge, he said to me, "We don't have room for the dog food." So, anyway, that is how crazy I have become with these. I also thought that these feeders were not quite right. I had to keep out the squirrels and rats and all kinds of things, and I needed to build these cages. But there was another reason. I was on Facebook and I asked somebody, I had this junco, a sparrow, what do they eat from the feeder? What should I buy? And this person, I call a poobah, she said, you should read a book about birds before you come here and ask questions like that. And I got the virtual slap. And I thought, because they said they don't go to feeders, so I'm somebody who defies authority. And I built this feeder, and sure enough, these are all ground feeders, these are all sparrows, and guess what? And then I raised the cages a little bit, and soon they were eating from the other feeders. So there, poobah, wrong.
Can I just say, I'm not holding her book, I'm holding yours, and she can go read it.
Anyway, so there, I started off knowing maybe 3 birds in the yard, and over time I got to recognize that those little brown birds really were different birds. And so these are some of them. I have up to 67 species. I don't count the ones that I see off in the distance, the pelicans, because they'll never land in my yard. And I thought that about great blue herons until one did land in my yard. So there are a lot of surprises. I'll just point out one. This little bird at the top is a fledgling oak titmouse and a baby. I want you to look at this, though, and tell me what you see in there that is kind of common about all of these birds. And I sometimes think maybe a 5-year-old child would know the answer. So this is a challenge for all of you, unless you're 5. And we won't wait too long. The common thing about it is they're all looking at me. Okay, and this was so important to me. It's something that I felt early on, that when a bird was busy eating or when it was drinking water, that when it looked up at me and then went back to doing what it was doing, that meant I had been accepted into its world. And I developed a relationship with individual birds. Not that we had a friendship, but that they had accepted me as just some part of its environment.
And you were no longer like an object of fear for them necessarily.
Well, they didn't come to a party or anything, but they would, as long as I was still, they would stay there. But the minute, I moved, they would take off. And that's an instinct, and it's an important one that they must have, not to fully trust anything, including me. even though I brought food. I was the flightless creature who brought the food, and they recognized that. Because, when I went to do my exercises in the morning, I would see them lining up along the fence in the barbecue grill, and it was like that scene in The Birds, the Hitchcock movie, lining up, but they didn't attack me.
So one of the images in here, I think it might be the very next one, is a report card. Like, there's all kinds of pictures of birds and illustrations, but then there's this. I want to tell us about this.
Yeah. Part of doing this journal includes doing drawings, and it was something that I learned to do, and it was kind of surprising to me that people actually liked the drawings, because I had been told many years ago when I was in school, this was a report card given to me by my art teacher, that I lacked imagination or drive, which are necessary to a deeper creative level. And I think what's important here, okay, maybe he was wrong. I did become a fiction writer, and I did learn how to draw. But what's important here is that we often, as kids, we hear these messages like that. You can't do it because you don't have that. You should be a doctor or something. But that is a message that stayed with me for many years.
Does it, when you're then a grown-up and you want to try something creative, does it, even if you have fabulous success in your history, does it take a while to shake that off?
Well, I've always been plagued by perfection syndrome and a lack of security about many things in life, and so this was part of it. I used to have dreams about this guy. Even when I was writing books, I'd have dreams, and he'd be there, and he'd kind of shake his head like, no, this is not good. So it did stick with me for a long time, but I needed to just do it for its own sake, not to impress anybody, and that is the nature of a journal. It's very private, and I didn't have to give it to anybody and have them critique anything. So I loved that part of it, that it was just for me, and that is the best part about writing as well.
Now, so then you start drawing, and in your early 60s, you take an art drawing class for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And you get your start drawing birds.
Yeah, that was my promise to myself, that one day I would retire, and I imagined a garret with, an easel, and I would be painting. And then I reached that age, and I thought, well, I'm never going to retire. I'm always going to be a writer, but I would start that. And I took lessons from a guy named John Muir Laws, like John Muir, the naturalist, and you can get these lessons for free online. But I started taking these lessons and learning how to draw many things, landscapes, but especially birds. Birds became most interesting to me. And as you can see, my early birds, they're not bad, but I don't think you'd pay good money for this. I was learning, and that was good. It was not going to be perfect. And also, to make sure I was not going to get caught up with perfection syndrome, I posted them on Facebook, which is kind of daring, because the poobah is out there as well who could disapprove. But I did use a pseudonym, so I was safe.
And you advanced, so let's be clear.
I started taking these lessons that included things like this, negative space. You start to imagine the form of the bird. But what John Muir Laws taught me also is that you should feel the bird as if you're feeling the shape, and also you're feeling the life force of the bird. Now, as a fiction writer, I took it one step forward, and I imagined that I was the bird. And that was important to me when I was drawing it. I had to feel the life of the bird. And if I didn't do that, the drawings kind of came out lifeless. I had to make the drawings personal. And that is what guided me as well, this meditative process of doing the details and then having these birds come to life. And so these are some of the birds that I've drawn. Some of them are drawn at different times of my life as I was getting to know the birds. Not all the drawings were anatomically correct, or the plumage was not exactly right. Some of the birds may not have been able to fly if they were real, but I got better and better, really in terms of just feeling that bird. And so some of these are my favorites. And I will say, one of the things that I did because as a feminist bird person, I found that most of the drawings that you see, the photography that you see about birds, they're male birds because their plumage is so much more, colorful. And I started doing female birds. So that was just something I decided to do for myself. It's all very personal, Yeah. I'm not getting paid for it. So I'm just going to do what I want to do.
Yeah. There's one more slide in this deck that I want to kind of go ahead to, because it's one of my favorites, and it's the great horned owl. There it is. I love this thing.
Well, this is, Now, I took this seriously when I was observing the birds, very carefully observing birds. And this is like after 7 years, we had a pair of great horned owls that came and they were in our yard for about 8 months. There was a mother and there was her son. She was teaching how to teaching how to hunt, cook. Yeah. So anyway, I started drawing this one day. I wanted to represent. And so I thought, oh, well, this is its resting face. And I'd been studying this bird for a long time. And then I drew the next one. This is the sexy face when it was trying to get a mate. It did bring a mate back. And then the happy face, the mother love face, the hangry face, which it had a lot. And finally, the attack human face when it was still hangry, hadn't gotten the food. So this is the scientific study of the great horned owl. Yeah.
I know I have made that hangry face myself. Attack human face. Did you draw that quickly?
Very quickly before the bird could come after me. Actually, I have a lot of people who've thanked me for drawing that because now they know. They know when to run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, these are wonderful, and it's great to open up the book and read your observations, and like you said, read something that was written for you, and then someday you handed it over to an editor and said, "What do you think of this?" And now we all get to enjoy it too. But thank you for sharing this with us. This is just magnificent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's move to the chairs. We'll put you right here, Amy.
Oh, right.
And I'll
Sorry.
jump over here. No, That's all right. Well, gosh, I have, I think I counted, I have 65,322 questions on my sheet.
I'll talk fast.
Before we jump fully in, I think I kind of want to begin with a very broad question, which is, everybody's going to look at your book, read your book, and come to their own conclusions about what meaning they take from it. What meaning did you take from it? What is it about for you?
Well, the beginning of the nature journaling had to do with what was going on in 2016. A lot of overt racism, including toward Asian Americans, and I was a target, and it was so distressing to me. I was in such despair over this ugliness that I had to find beauty again in the world, and I determined that I would go into a place that I had found as a refuge when I was younger, and that was in nature. I started doing the nature journaling, learning how to just be there quietly and appreciate what's there.
As a kid, you were always into nature. You call it a refuge from family chaos.
My mother was somebody who was very emotional, and she would actually threaten to take her life if I didn't finish my rice or if she was very upset with things. And so I did go into the creek one time when we moved constantly. But there was a time we lived in a place for 3 years, and there was a creek next door, and I would go into the creek, I would look at lizards, I would catch them, I would catch snakes, I would catch frogs, and that was giving me this sense of being away. I was completely enamored. But somehow I never looked up. And I think that to look at the birds, and I think in part because I was nearsighted, and maybe also because there was that movie, The Birds, and we did see black birds, but they were very, very scary to me. So that was, a nature, but on a lower level.
So you're looking down, you're grabbing
down.
toads and poking frogs, and you describe
spiders. The next book, by the way, is the Backyard Snake Chronicles. I hope that you will buy that one as well.
When did you finally decide to look up?
Really, I would look at birds, but with the same interest that you would say, wow, there's a deer, or, if you went outside and saw, say, a lion, I went on safari, and there would be a bird, and I would be interested, but not more interested in a bird than the tiger or something. And it wasn't until 2016 when I discovered that I could do this refuge and drawing in nature that I became interested in my own backyard. I can't drive, so I couldn't go to these wonderful places. And there was a beautiful backyard, and it turned out there were birds. So I started looking up at the birds constantly and seeing everything. And they were also on the ground feeders that never feed in cages, they were there as well. Yeah. So that was it.
So in the book you say, you were 64 when you took drawing classes for the first time. You had wanted to be an artist when you were younger, but you were discouraged. I'm 42, and I am still afraid to try new things.
Never too late, Ed. Yeah.
But you obviously have not failed at this. The illustrations are stunning in the book. So before that, when you were first starting out, how did that feel to decide I'm doing this and other people are going to see it in this class?
Well, I didn't think that people were going to see it. And that was the thing. I was doing this for myself. But because I had this perfection syndrome problem, I did, as I said, I posted on the Nature Journal page. And I took very great encouragement from people who would just look at it. And it wasn't just the drawings, it was the observations that I made. And what I was illustrating were the dramas that I saw in the backyard. I didn't put down, this bird is 6.5 inches. I put down, this bird is looking at another bird, and they're going to attack each other for the same pile of mealworms. And then I would draw the drama of that. And that's what it was. It was for me. It was to memorialize what I saw on that day. It helped me live in the moment. We're so busy as people living ahead or reflecting something that went wrong in the past. And in doing this journal, I was always focused right there, focused with intentional curiosity and also this attentiveness we don't have in this digital world of looking at our iPhones. But for hours, for 12 hours a day, I could be focused on the birds and drawing them.
Wow, yeah. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that's obsessive.
Well,
that's not normal. That's not normal. I'm not saying that you all should do that.
But it has such a beautiful outcome, right? And I wonder, as grown-ups, do you feel like we have to really think about and choose curiosity, whereas when you're a kid, it sort of comes naturally because everything's new?
Yeah, everything is new when you're a kid, and if you notice kids, when they go out into nature, they might pick things up, they might turn it over, they might look at the spores on ferns, they might taste things, which is not always good, but everything is new, and we stop doing that as adults, but in this nature journaling mode, everything I had to do, everything that I saw, I had to look at it with the curiosity of a child. And in fact, I had a mentor who was 13 years old, Fiona Galogli, and I thought she was this annoying child because she was always asking questions. And then I discovered, well, that is actually the reason why we're out here, to see things afresh, to ask the questions, and not to think we have the answers. Questions lead to questions, and those questions make us pay attention more to what is in front of us.
You note that your instructor, John Muir-Laws, gave you some advice that was, the quote is, as you look at the bird, try to feel the life within it. And you say that came naturally to you as a fiction writer.
Yeah, because when I write characters, I have to imagine at some point that I am that character. And in part is because you have to have this imagination that contains sympathy and compassion. You have to like yourself, you have to love yourself, and you take that in and make it believable by making it a person. So I did that with birds. I found that I had great compassion. The thing that I learned about birds, there's a single thing that's the most important, and that is when you look at a bird and everything it does every single day, it is about survival. That every day is a chance for the bird to survive. It has to find food, it has to be wary not to be taken, it has to find shelter. And so when you watch these behaviors, you know it's within that framework.
So stay with me on this next question because it's a little weird.
Okay.
In cartoons, when a cartoon animator draws a bird and they want to tell the audience, this is a character with feelings and things to say and do, they give it human eyes, whites and pupils and muscles that make expressions.
And eyelashes, yeah.
Eyelashes, yeah. And when they don't want to do that, they do the exact opposite, and the bird is dead-eyed and sort of soulless. These illustrations, there's so many expressions. Like, you've gotten the anatomy right, the black of the eye with a little gleam of light in it. But there's so many expressions. There's a baby crow in there that looks, well, frankly, looks kind of miffed. And other birds that look happy and surprised and angry. And I just wonder, like, were you going for personality and mood? And how did you decide to kind of capture that?
Well, I do think that birds have personalities. I actually think that ants have personalities. But at the same time, I knew that I should not anthropomorphize these birds looking through my own sense as a human being, that not everything is going to be strictly analogous to our own behaviors. But that was a way to start off looking at traits. So when we talk about trust, we think about what's important to us as human beings with trust. Well, what's important? Would a bird call that trust? What do they need to do to overcome that? What about love? What about fun? And so I would see the birds, and I thought it was good for me to think about that because I would observe the behaviors that might have fallen into those concepts. And then I ended up finding that even biologists thought it was okay. In fact, one of them is in the audience, Joan Strassman, whose book I really love, Slow Birding. And we talked about this, that you can kind of use this, but without interpreting really strictly the intentions of a bird. It's like a framework for looking at it.
Well, so you use the phrase the sin of anthropomorphization.
Yeah.
And I get why scientists think that, right? They want to be very careful about not letting human qualities cloud their conclusions or their observations. Is it such a sin for the rest of us?
Oh, no, not for a writer. A fiction writer?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? You have to imagine also, I'm doing this journal for myself. It's not like I'm submitting it to get published. It's not like anybody else is going to read this thing. It's a very private journal. So I could have fun with it if I decided that the birds could talk. What would they say? They would say things like, finish your food, or don't talk back to me, or you've got nits in your head, whatever it is. I could make it up, and no one's going to criticize me for that. But at the same time, I did not want that kind of imagination to cloud what I was seeing. And the important thing was looking at their behavior and recognizing it from a bird point of view. But I could have fun with it. Nobody was going to read it, so what the hell?
Oops.
Yeah, oops. Well, my editor, my dear editor, wonderful editor at Knopf, he said to me every now and then, how's that novel going? And it was, the terrible question. And it was, in 2016, I couldn't do that novel. I had to abandon it. And then COVID came, and that didn't seem right. The future was different, and I had to start over again. So how's that novel became the horrible question. But one day my editor said, how about we publish that journal you've been working on? You mean the thing, the distraction, the goofing off thing that I've been doing? And I said, it's not that kind of book. You're mistaken. It's not those pretty drawings that I send you every now and then. They're cartoons, they're funny ideas, it's smudged, it has wine stains on it. And he said, this is great because you can use this in your life. He said, that's authentic. And I said, wow, that's cool. Smudges, mess, that's authentic. My house is authentic. And so we presented this to the publishing house, and they, believe it or not, they wanted to publish it. Believe me, if you saw the original journals and pages, they're a mess. And people at the publishing house did a magnificent job of putting this together and looking like I was a very organized person. And so it became this book. I'm so grateful to him.
At lunch today, my significant other is in the audience somewhere, and he and I were describing the need to tidy this weekend. And honey, I don't want to screw up our authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. Yep.
It's awesome. Let's talk about some particular birds. You write pretty early on in the book that you have a lot of affection for the California scrub jay. Can you begin?
Well, sort of.
Affection might not be the right word.
Affection, well, love, hate, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you have a particular fondness for it early in the book. Just describe it physically before we talk about the book.
I mean, they have so much personality. They're corvids, like crows and ravens, so they are very intelligent. In fact, I would say they are the most intelligent birds in my yard. There are counterparts to, there's blue jays, there are Steller's jays, so all of them are incredibly smart. This jay would get into all kinds of things, into the feeders. It couldn't fit in there, but it would knock the feeders so that the seeds would fall down. I would try to prevent the bird from getting into the feeders. I would put the bowls on silicone pads so that it couldn't push it to the side, and then it turned out there was confetti on the ground, that it had torn that up. I put branches around. Eventually, I put bricks around the bowls in these feeders so it couldn't move. And, Amy won Scrub J 0, but I found one day it stuck its entire head in there, which was a very risky maneuver for it to do. And so then I had to wonder about what analysis did it use to determine it could do that without being killed. And often I think it just determined I was a wuss and I would never do anything to this bird. But that was the kind of relationship we had, my trying to do things to control it, but observing this bird doing so many smart things.
One of those smart things was, well, here I go anthropomorphizing, but essentially farming. This bird planted seeds and they grew.
Well, that's what scrub jays do. In fact, I think that we can thank the scrub jays for the many oak trees in Sausalito. They plant about 1,000 acorns or more a year. And so we have this green roof, and we have to tend to it. And they end up, our green roof specialists, I don't get up there because I would die falling off the roof. But they go up there routinely, and they have to remove these little mini trees. Imagine if we didn't do that. We'd have our roof would go crashing down. But that's part of it.
You got some sunflower. I mean, there was some sunflower seeds in the feed, and it.
Yeah. That was the other thing. When I first started, I wasn't that experienced, and I saw you could get shelled sunflower seeds. For some reason, I thought shelled mean they took them out of the shell. Not true. The scrub jays would pull them out, and they drop a lot of them. And with shelled seeds, they actually become planted in the ground, and you would have sunflowers come up. Unfortunately, we could not farm those sunflowers, the seeds then, because then they would eat them all in one fell swoop. So yeah, they can plant oak trees, they can plant flowers, anything that's a seed, they can do that.
Essentially grow their own food.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about page 135, which might not mean much when I say it that way, but the date at the top of the entry is March 9th, 2020.
Yes.
I'm just going to read a little bit of the beginning and the end. The entry begins by saying, almost everything seems like a potential transmitter of disease and death. The groceries, a doorknob, another person, but not the birds. The birds are a balm. And then it goes on to describe what you're seeing, an oak titmouse, and you end this way. There is talk, this is again March 9th, 2020, there is talk that the shutdown will continue into April. a lot can change. The pandemic may subside. In the meantime, I will never feel bored. That's a beautiful thought. I remember, I think we all do, the difficulty of that moment in our history and not being sure what was coming next. But to be able to know that you wouldn't feel bored and that you'd have something with you is beautiful.
It was always that combination of my own imagination, my mind, and these observations, and the fact these birds were there. They never asked anything of me, and I could watch all day long and be deeply into nature, finding that I was asking questions of myself, often having to do with morality. In fact, often having to do with mortality. And so when it's not simply that you're seeing beautiful birds, it's occupying my sense of self and going deeply into what I believe. And that's what I believe I have to do as a writer. And so these birds were very inspiring to me. And it was never tiring to see the same bird day after day. And in fact, it was the best part of it, seeing the birds and a continuous set of behaviors over time that enabled me to understand them and understand myself.
The shutdown obviously went well past April, but it sounds like it worked.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was enough to get you through that all.
I felt so lucky. There were so many people who felt very closed in, shut off, isolated, and I always would have these birds. It was enough for me. I would see them first thing in the morning. I'd be brushing my teeth, and then this bird would be staring at me, wondering when I was going to bring out the mealworms. And then I would have, another bird. I would go to my dining room to sit down to do some work, and they would be all staring at me. And it was that I had company as well. I would never have been lonely, and I would always be curious. I would always have that with me. And so there was always plenty to learn. And that's what I mean by never being bored. When we're looking at the same thing over and over again, if you saw the same show over and over again, eventually you're going to get bored and you want to move on to something else. But that was never true with the birds. It was always new. It was also new because I was asking myself different questions. One of the questions had to do with the life of the mealworms that I was feeding it. These creatures obviously looked like they were fearful. They wanted to escape. Should I feel bad for the mealworms? And that sounds, funny, and it is kind of funny, but at the same time, I was asking myself, is there a hierarchy in the animal kingdom where my compassion, my sympathy for animals and their death stops? And why should it stop? Just because it didn't look very cute? So that was an example of a question that I had.
Well, that's interesting because there's a different moment in the book that struck me in that same way, which is you write about an invasion of yellow jackets into one of your feeders and the decision to set up yellow jacket traps. These are bugs that are incredibly easy to dislike, but you struggled with this a little bit.
Yeah. Well, they were eating the mealworms, and so they were the live mealworms. Of course, you have to eat them live. We're not going to saute them in Chinese sauce or anything. But they were eating them, and the birds couldn't get to them. So I put up the yellow jacket trap. It had dog food and sugar in it, and they went in there quite easily. And you could see that they were in distress, and they were making these sounds. And then more yellow jackets would come. They would be on the outside, and I was thinking, what are they saying to each other? And then I had read that yellow jackets can actually recognize each other. And, I don't know if it's their face or whatever, but then I imagined that these ones on the outside were saying, "Hold on, Betty, we're getting help," and they were just saying that, and suddenly something was communicated, and all of the ones that were outside left immediately. And I thought, do they have a sense of altruism? Were they saying, George, take off, save yourself, take care of the kids, or whatever? I don't know. But that's what I said, I don't want to get into this trap of just saying, well, that's the circle of life, and it cuts me off from the feelings that I should have to ask these questions, of course, not just with yellow jackets, but any creature, but also humans, that we read about people in the paper. What kind of sympathy should I feel for these people? And by looking at creatures at that level, in the backyard, it provoked me to think about a sense of compassion. What do we mean by that? How can I feel that more? I don't want to say circle of life. I want to feel it's sad. I know it's necessary, but I think it's important for me to feel that.
How do you prevent that from becoming overwhelming?
I don't. I let it be overwhelming. It's never to the point. I mean, I'm not becoming incapacitated by it. I simply have to ask the question and then to feel it. It's like when we read the news, we see some terrible situation that we still can feel it to some point. It's not going to overtake us, but then we are reminded and we have to go there. Whether we think about our own lives and say we're lucky, but then we think of another person in our lives who's not so lucky, whose life is miserable. So it is the practice of compassion that I think is very important and is also part of writing fiction. Fiction is imagination, and I believe that imagination is the closest thing we have to compassion. We have to imagine the life of the other. And so it was hand in hand, looking at nature, writing fiction.
One more 2020 question, because it was, for me, it felt like the year when nothing happened and the year when everything happened all at once, right? Because we were in our individual lives kind of stuck. But the world around us was doing so much. In California, there were devastating wildfires that summer.
Yeah.
I was living in Seattle at the time. The smoke hit us, and it was incapacitating to our communities. We didn't have the fires, and I can't imagine how it felt in those areas. But with the smoke, and the brown skies and the red sun and all the things smoke brings, also came a whole bunch of different kinds of birds.
Yeah. I got to see in real time what happens when habitat changes and what birds, are leaving from a habitat that's been destroyed. Of course, I felt very lucky that these birds I never would have seen were landing in my yard. They only came to be in the water bowls to bathe and to drink. And that is an essential thing. And I will say, if you want to attract birds and you don't want to deal with the non-GMO seeds and all that kind of stuff, just put out water bowls. Change it every day. Clean your bowls. Anyway, what I was doing then was also putting out fresh water constantly and looking at these birds. Birds that I could add to my backyard list, but also recognizing that I needed to be more active in conservation. This is what's happening in, a moment of destruction by the wildfires, but there are things happening in the rest of the world that is destroying habitat. And when you talk about saving species, it has to do with habitat. You saw that cute little oak titmouse? That oak titmouse lives in oak trees. It's not going to be in a sycamore tree. And when you have oak trees being destroyed, you are not going to see that species anymore. So I became aware of that and got involved with conservation. I'm on the board of the American Bird Conservancy, and I'm learning what conservation is. I didn't know what it was, and I'm learning now.
It's a single word for a lot of different ideas, it seems like.
Yeah. It can be, for example, the kinds of things we do in our own homes. So, for example, I didn't know this. First of all, there's the fact that out of all, when you look at a songbird or a hawk, that only 25% of them survive. That means fully 75% of them die before adulthood. And then you have these other factors that happen that can also impact those who do survive. So, for example, window collisions. We've heard about this, these dramatic examples, but I'm sure many of you have had a bird hit your window and die or be injured. And that was happening to me. I have one death a year, but that was one death too many. And I thought about, so 1 billion a year die by window collision. And then I found out that 1 to 4 billion birds die by cats, outdoor cats. I never knew that. I had an outdoor cat. I never worried about birds, and I would have placed my cat's love of sunshine, over the life of a bird, and didn't think about it. And I think about it now, and I say to myself, what decision would I have made if I still had a cat? Well, fortunately, it was not going to be that difficult because I always clipped my cat's nails from the time that she was, first came in our house. But it was not to save birds, it was to save our sofa. But, it would be something to think about, and you say bells around the neck? No, because a lot of these birds are nesting on the ground and they cannot run away as baby birds, So it was learning a lot. I think we need to have this information, and then we make informed decisions.
I was really struck by the level of care you wish you could offer certain birds. You describe a goldfinch that was ill with conjunctivitis. You talk about a spotted towhee that was missing part of a leg, a foot.
Yeah, a leg and a foot, yeah.
It feels like a tricky line, like the balance between what is a result of this human world that they're trying to navigate and what is just nature being nature.
Yeah, a lot of it is nature. For example, there was a big eruption of pine siskins, and they would develop this disease, salmonellosis, and they would die in great numbers, and you have to say to yourself, I need to take down the feeders because they're social birds, they spread their disease very quickly. And so you have to make decisions as part of that environment that is being impacted. And some of it you have to say, well, does my having feeders have something to do with passing along these, diseases? So it all comes hand in hand with a responsibility to have the feeders. Once you're aware, conservation, cleaning the feeders, all of that, it's all hand in hand. When you love birds, you want to save them.
Bird baths, speaking of things you'd have in your backyard, bird baths can be dangerous if not done properly.
That's right. A lot of people have these beautiful fountains and they spurt water and a Roman bath kind of style. And it turns out, I didn't think about this before, it turns out they're not all ducks. And so a little baby bird going into a bird bath that is more than 1.5 inches of water will drown. And that happens to a lot of people, and they're crushed when they see that that's happening. So I will advise that if you want to put out something for your songbirds, get what I use are terracotta saucers that are with your pots. And I just put in 1 inch of water. I put a rock in so they can assess the depth of it. And that also allows those other pollinators, the bees, to go in and get water and not fall in and drown.
Wow. I want to ask you about one more backyard critter, squirrels.
If you have feeders, you know what we're talking about.
I want to tell you one of the funniest things I've ever witnessed was standing in my parents' dining room looking out the window at my father he had a feeder on a pole in the middle of the yard, not near anything else you could jump from, but somehow the squirrels still got up, and he put a slinky on the pole. And you'd think the funny part would be the squirrels No. The funny part was watching my dad watch the squirrels instantly conquer it.
Exactly, yeah.
You describe squirrels as, here's the quote, they're like Olympic gymnasts with grappling hooks for feet and an ingenious criminal mind.
Yeah. You have no idea how many things I tried, cages, but putting the feeder part of it off the pole, crooked, the pole is crooked so that it's farther out, or it was like squirrels 3, Amy 0, and I had to change that. And I'll tell you what worked. These are California squirrels, they're a little laid back or whatever. So I'm just going to tell you it may not be a universal solution. But what I found is if you bought this hot pepper suet and chips, they didn't like that at all. And the birds didn't care. They don't have a lot of, taste buds. In fact, I think they preferred it. It was like Sichuan food for them. But squirrels hated it. So they took one bite and then they never came back. They didn't even come back to just sentimentally look at the feeders. They just abandoned it completely, which was wonderful, But then there were the rats. Yeah.
Tell us about the rats.
Well,
Now that the audience is...
the rats can actually, those feeder, the cages that I made, rats can actually get into them still. Even though they look like big fat rats, they are so adaptable. So they would go in there, and there would be 3 you'd see in the daytime, and then sometimes there would be more. And at night, it looked like we were having a marathon race of these rats running across the patio. And I knew they were coming from the neighbor's ivy patch. There was nothing I could do. That wasn't my ivy. I couldn't poison them. If I did, raptors would eat that and they would die, horrible death. Because I had seen rats that had eaten poison. Somebody in the neighborhood had done that. It's horrible. But what happened was this solution got rid of all of them. And that was when the great horned owls moved in. And the mother was teaching her baby how to hunt. And there were no more rats. That's what I recommend to you. Yeah. You can actually buy these owl boxes, and barn owls will use them. Great horned owls will not. They tend to take the nest of squirrels or raptors, other raptors. They're kind of lazy. But the barn owls, you can go to certain places and they will put that up for you. Really a great solution.
I mean,
no guilt,
No guilt.
No guilt.
Resting face on a great horned owl basically is "don't mess with me" face. Like it's kind of the same face.
Yeah.
Over these years now of feeding birds, observing them in your yard, have you changed the way you think about your backyard or your home?
Wow, good question. I do think of it not just as my home, but a place that I share with other creatures. I do think it's not just the birds I share this with. I share it with squirrels. I share it with a whole ecology. I have to think about insects and other pollinators because the birds depend on these seeds and things that are there. I am aware that there are fewer insects in the world, for example. And I see these birds shoot out of the trees and take these insects. I wonder why there are not as many insects coming into our house when we leave the windows open. So I do think of it differently, this balance that we have in the world, the balance of ecology. And when you have something that's out of balance, it affects the whole system of life that is there. So this is just my backyard that I'm looking at. But it's a good way for me to appreciate the world, to be concerned about the world, the entire world, and what is happening there in real time and over time.
Connecting with birds on the level you describe in the book seems to me that it requires a certain kind of stillness and patience. Such a contrast to what you describe early in the book, grabbing lizards and poking frogs. And I wonder if there's a different kind of peace you felt in either of those activities. Is it the same kind of refuge and sanctuary, or is it a different feeling?
It is a difference in the peace you feel when you are looking and fully absorbing what is happening out there. You are not changing that world out there when you are just sitting. I mean, when you try to capture an animal, that is a completely different thing. I don't try to capture these birds, although sometimes they come to me and the hummingbirds will sit on my hand. But that is their choice, and it's that feeling of you are lucky to be in this world, to see this right before your eyes.
You talk about imagining yourself as the characters you write in fiction, that you sort of have to inhabit them in order to get them right. Have you ever imagined yourself as a particular bird? If you were a tree...
all of them. When I draw them, I'm imagining that I'm all of them. People have asked me, do you have a favorite bird you would want to be? And I used to say, well, oak titmouse, they got these funny personalities. They have this crest, and they're squabbling and scolding people, and they're so tiny, they're funny. Or I'd want to be a hummingbird. They fly so well, they can go backwards. But then I decided I wanted to be, of course, a great horned owl because they're magnificent. And then I remembered that they ate the rats in my yard. I would rather eat nuts or seeds or something like that. So yeah, that's imagining also that I am this bird and that's what I'm going to have to eat. I did this one cartoon though, and in imagining what they are seeing, I drew a cartoon of myself looking at the birds because I couldn't understand why when I went there and I stood still, the birds would remain. But once I put my binoculars up, they took off. Okay, and so I drew a picture. I took a screenshot, a reverse screenshot to see what I look like. And I was scary. I look like an owl with these big dark eyes. And so I drew that, and that was to remind me that I am intrusive in their world if I am not still. They force me to be still, because if I move, they will take off. If I pick up big binoculars, they will take off. And that is the reason why I have very small binoculars. I wear them around my neck all day long in the house because I never know when I'm going to see something interesting.
A coworker of mine was asking me to ask you this question, and I love the question too, and you're a writer, so I hope you like this question as well. There are magnificent collective nouns for birds. It's a murder of crows. It is an unkindness of ravens. I believe it's a flamboyance of flamingos. Do you have a favorite collective noun for birds?
A bunch of birds.
A bunch of birds?
Yeah. A bunch of birds. There's a bunch of birds out there. Actually, we all know that expression, a murder of crows. I actually did a little documentation of a murder of a crow. So it's called A Murder of Crow. And it was because I was having these crows come, and they're very smart. They were coming and they were knocking into the feeders. They were scaring the little birds. They were making a mess. And they had their fledglings come, and they were learning to become criminals in my yard. And I needed to figure out a way to stop them. Of course, I can't kill them. What could I do? So I realized that I'd read something that they can recognize people, and people had been mean, and they could recognize each other. So I went to the store and I bought a dead crow. Of course, it was fake, and it was $14, and it had real feathers, and I mussed it up and I hung it upside down. And I thought the crows, a few of them that came in the yard, they would see this, they'd, wonder what it was and then take off. But instead, there were like 50 of them that came from all directions, north, south, east, west. It was like they called the clans, there's been a murder, and everybody come. And they all flew over it and looked, and then they were in the tree and they were screaming, and I guess it was grief or something. But I think now they associate me with being a murderer because they don't come to the yard. Sometimes the new ones, a young one, will be sitting on the fence and looking at me, and then they take off. So they have learned this lesson. It's passed from generation to generation. Here's where you find this delicious thing to eat. Don't go there. Amy's Bistro, no. So yeah, that's how I got rid of the crows. Very humane, $14. You can just, Wild Birds Unlimited, you get one yourself. So.
You get enough of them, it might work for some of the neighbors too,
Yeah.
Why do you think birding connects with people so much versus observing other things in nature? We don't talk about going deering. I mean, there's hunting, but there's not a lot of specific species-oriented hobbying other than birding,
Part of it is once you are aware of birds, they're everywhere. And there's something that David Sibley, the great birder who writes the guides, has said that I think is very true of me. Wherever I go, I am birding. Because you can see these. Now, what I mean by birding is not what is this competitive kind of looking at the bird where people have memorized 900 bird names and they can identify exactly, 100 yards away, oh, that's a, crested something or other. I can't do that, and I don't think it's fun. It's very competitive. What I mean by birding is whatever you want to do when you admire and look at birds and they give you joy. So maybe you don't even know the name of the bird, but you're watching the bird and appreciating what it's doing. And if you watch long enough, you will get that appreciation of birds. Birds over time have been appreciated for different reasons, but another one of the ways that I have found is really common is that when some loved one dies, many people believe when they see a bird looking at them that has come to their window for the first time, that it is the loved one who is saying goodbye, that they're free of whatever pain they had. And I've had that happen, and you have to wonder, is this imagination combining with grief and leading to a kind of hope? And that may be true, and that's enough. It doesn't matter if this is true or not. So we all derive something from birds, and I think a lot of it is hope, that something has come out there that has brightened our day because we haven't seen it. And there's so many of them. There's so much beauty in the world that we can never exhaust ourselves looking at birds.
You are on the road with the book a lot. You also have a place in New York. When you're not in that backyard in California, how do you stay connected?
Well, I don't write in my journal because the Backyard Bird Chronicle it has integrity. It has to be the backyard. So when I'm in New York, where I live part of the time, what I see are gulls and pigeons and maybe a house sparrow. And they are in places like on the sill, the concrete sill, or on a light pole. So what I do to actually see more birds and be into nature is I go to Central Park. I take the subway and I go up there and I meet with people who also love birds. There's a wonderful person who I've gotten to know, Christian Cooper. I don't know if you've heard of this person. A great birder who will look and identify warblers. Now, this is how serious people are. They will see, you'll meet up with them at 7 o'clock. They've been out there since 6, and they will say, I got double digits. And that means they got double digits in warblers. They've seen more than 10 warblers in the morning. I don't need to see more than 10. I don't need to see more than 1. I'm just out there with the birds, and somebody is helping me to find them. Christian Cooper, who birds every single day during the spring migration period, he is the guy who was telling somebody, you got to put your dog on a leash. This is a big bugaboo of a lot of us who bird in Central Park because the dogs are trampling areas where birds are nesting. And then this woman called up made a 911 call and said, there's an African American who's threatening me. Okay, so that's Christian Cooper, the nicest guy who is, I got double digits, is more how you should think of Chris. And there are a number of friends who we go birding with, and we're very casual, we're not competitive. And part of birding then is what you make of it. For me, it is also the sharing with friends of beauty out there. So we get together whenever I come in, I said, are you available on Sunday to go out? What time should we meet? And we will meet at the same bridge, and then we'll go out and we'll see people on the side. We say, did you see any interesting birds? Someone will tell us. For me, every bird is interesting. There are people who say, that's a trash bird, or this is a good bird. Every single bird to me is an interesting bird. It could be a pigeon. I still think they're interesting and beautiful in their own way.
About a year and a half ago or so, there was a pink-footed goose that found its way here to northern Michigan. These are native to Scandinavia, northern Europe. Somehow it got blown over here in a storm, is the theory. The birding community went crazy for it in a very good way. We got a news tip about a pink-footed goose. I sent a reporter on a literal wild goose chase. He found it. He brought back an amazing story. But it does seem that it brings people together. I mean, some of these folks came, they heard about it, they drove 5, 6, 7, 8 hours.
They're crazy. Those are the crazy birders, okay? I'm not that kind of person. No, you shouldn't be that way. I mean, that's crazy. I'm telling you. That's just my personal opinion. Okay, 5 hours for one bird, you know. I'm sorry, you can continue.
No, that's great. That was a great answer about the beauty of human connection.
Now, this is something that people who seriously bird, when they hear of a rare bird, and they're often what's called vagrants, birds that are normally not seen there ever because that's not their territory, or not seen at that time of year that's out of season. And it's a very special thing to see that. I'm normally not that way, but I have had those in my backyard. And it causes what I call bird tachycardia. I don't always know what they are, but in some cases I have seen a bird that I knew was did not go further than pretty much where you are here. And there it was in my West Coast backyard. I had drawn this bird a year before because I had hoped to see it on the East Coast. And so when it turned to me and I saw this characteristic black spot on a clear chest, and that it had certain coloration and a bicolor bill that was yellow, et cetera, I knew what this was. And I knew also that nobody would think that I'd actually seen it. But because I draw birds, because I call out the field marks and draw them, it actually got accepted as a bird that was seen. And not only that, because the monitor had seen that same bird and seen it in a flock of golden-crowned sparrows and so on and so forth. So the danger, though, is if you report a rare bird in your yard, you could have people traveling 5 hours to jump over your fence to see that bird. Don't do it.
If we took a poll of the audience, we would find out that there are a variety of living situations among all of us. Some of us have big, expansive yards or homes that are nestled in the woods, or no yard, or a view of a brick wall or a parking lot. What's your advice to all of us who might want to capture just a little of the thing you describe in your book?
Well, one, obviously, is you could go to a park and see these birds. But I would say, even if you have no yard, even if you have no patio or balcony or anything, there is a way to attract birds. Even if your condominium association forbids you from having feeders, you can still put out water. What are they going to say? You can't have water out on your sill or something? So you can attract birds to come to your house, and all you need is one. You can put a humming feeder out, and all you need is one. You can see the same bird over and over again, and be so gratified that this creature came within proximity to you that to allow you to see it. It's possible for everybody to see birds, and you have to be creative, just as I have, and not really creative, but putting out mealworms, it's not too creative, but you can go to different places. And I would say you find what kind of bird you want to see. And that's going to determine where you go. You can look up in the sky and you can appreciate raptors. And the raptor may be a beautiful hawk, or it could be a turkey vulture. And they're interesting too. So it's really up to you what you want to see and where you go. And it could be in your yard. I can't drive. I have to look at the birds in my yard, but I found there were plenty to look at.
Amy, thank you for helping me get through my list of 65,322 questions. But enough out of me. We want to hear questions from you. And so here's how this can work. We've got 3 microphones. We've got a microphone here and a microphone there at the front of that aisle. And then up in the balcony, we've got someone roving with a microphone. So if you're up there, try to get that person's attention or my attention, and we'll get to you as quickly as we can. But let's start. We've got a hand up in the back of the balcony there. If we can get the microphone over to the back row there, white shirt. Let's start there if we can. Then we'll just rotate microphone to microphone. So we're going to ask you to queue up if you have a question at these microphones, and raise your hand up there. Do we have the microphone up in the balcony? I'll repeat your question. You yell your question, I'll repeat your question.
Did you ever have any trouble with bears?
Okay, for our live stream audience and for folks who might not have heard, did you ever have any trouble with bears?
Bears with bird feeders, I do not do that. I actually live in the woods. I have a cabin in Tahoe. I've had my house broken into 4 times. So no, I'm not going to put food out there and attract them. Because they will, they see us as lunch boxes. These are habituated bears. If you put out cat food and you're in an area with bears, any food you put out is going to attract them. And you don't want that to happen because they will continue to break into places like mine or other people who are there. And when they do it too often, somebody will ask for a depredation license, and that means they have license to kill the bear. So no bird feeders where bears are.
Yeah. By the way, if you're joining us on our live stream audience, you can ask your question through that platform as well. We are watching that, and Noel will step up to the microphone and give us a signal when there's a question from our live stream audience. I see someone queued up right here at this microphone, and we'll come to you too, sir, because we actually, I should say, sorry, I forgot to say this part. We have another microphone on the floor roving, so we can pass that in for folks who are especially in the middle where you're going to have to climb over everybody. So go ahead. Let's start. Let's go here for this question.
What I have is not a simple question. It actually is something that's been on my mind while you talked this evening. Is that 50 years ago, I was a young nurse training in psychiatric nursing in North Carolina in a very large state-operated psychiatric facility. I was assigned to see this one lady who was schizophrenic. She had been institutionalized for over 20 years. And she basically, no one could remember when she had left her room. And she was totally antisocial. She couldn't deal with people at all. What she would tell me is that she talked with the birds, and that's who she communicated with. And as you talk about your ideas and thoughts of watching the birds, made me think that she was perhaps, the birds were more than hallucinations. They may have been therapeutic for her in a way. And I just needed to share that with you that...
I think that, well, I communicate with the birds, and I don't expect that they understand everything. I think that a lot of it has to do with emotion. So I will try to create an aura of trust. And with animals, sometimes we can find that emotion that we can't find with people. I do trust people, but I have found that, and I have been in a situation with young children who are have had psychosis, and that you can present them with an animal, and that is something, if you build that trust, I don't think it's harmful for them to believe that they can talk to those animals. It's a soothing thing, and it's also a way to remind ourselves we need to have this peace within us to have others come and trust us.
I've enjoyed your book so much and so glad you came this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's very nice. If we have a roving floor mic, right here in row 3, there's a gentleman in a blue shirt who raised his hand. I want to make sure we get the mic in there. And I have a quick follow-up while we do that. That comment made me think about how one of the messages I took away from your book was that you sort of you take from the natural world what you need to take from the natural world, and that's okay.
Yeah,
That's the idea.
it's very personal. You can find that you need to trust, for example, is a very important thing that I must feel with people. So I got to examine that with birds. What do they need from me to trust? Well, first I have to be very still. And I found that it didn't matter if I talked to them. I thought at one point that if I said anything, if I wasn't completely silent, they would take off. But that wasn't true. It was the tone of my voice that mattered, where they just remained. I'd say, "You're so handsome, you're so brave, look how hungry you are," and they remained. And they would look at me, and then they go back to feeding.
Wow. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Amy. Question for you. We partially answered already, actually. But do you ever talk to the birds and trying to make their sounds?
Bird sounds. I'm not good at making bird sounds. They have a different vocal mechanism in their throat called the larynx, and they can actually produce two sounds at the same time. They can do these warbles, they can do these things that sound like water running. So no, I can't. But what I found with birds is sometimes it's enough if I do the imitation of the intonation of the bird. They seem to recognize that rhythm. So for example, with the Anna's hummingbird, they make a very complex sound that sounds like a little chirp and then a beat, two beats. And so it goes like this. And the hummingbird will come to me after doing this several times, and it will be making the sound off in the distance and answering me, and then it will come. Now, I have the feeling, after a while, I learned that wasn't, like come over and play, that it was interpreting. It was, "I'm going to take your food, so you better come right away." Because it would buzz me, it would go over to the food, it would do these threatening postures of fanning out its feathers and circling me. But so that's how I learned the meaning of
We have a question from our live stream audience, I think.
Yes,
Is that right?
this is a question from Donna, and she would like to know if you have ever been to Bird Street in China.
Bird Street. I don't know of a Bird Street in China. I do know that birds have been very important to people, and they. The sad thing is, in the past, they used to catch wild birds and put them in cages and sell them at the market. But I've seen people do that. Is that any worse than people who take other birds and put them in cages? My feeling is that we look at birds for different reasons, and if looking at birds and what we do with birds fosters a relationship that is an appreciation of nature, then it can have a benefit. However, I wouldn't do that. I don't know what Bird Street is named after. I have a feeling it's where there was a marketplace for birds.
Do we have a question up in the balcony? Anybody? Any hands up there? Hand right here, right on the aisle to your right. There we go. And then here next.
Should I stand up? Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, we're good. I just had kind of a question. I like to walk at my local walking trails. It's Grass River, about 40 minutes from here. It was about a month ago. They had a sign that said, "There are northern goshawks here with their babies. So if you go through this trail, go quickly, go quietly." And I thought, I'm by myself. Okay, it's quiet, I can do it. Well, I saw one in the tree, and I thought, okay, I'm not near its tree, I'm just gonna go. I didn't know that northern goshawks are one of the most aggressive raptors in North America. And that thing, dive bombed, and all I can remember is this bird face just coming straight at me. I turned around and I ran, and I didn't have any issues with it. But I guess my question is, have you ever been attacked by a bird, or almost attacked by a bird, or what to do to
in
not
my imagination
get attacked by a
when
bird?
I was a child, that the birds that were out there were from the Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Birds. I have not been attacked, but the scrub jays in my yard shriek at me. They fly very close to me because they have a nest. There are nestlings now in my yard. And I only know that because I saw the birds sitting very quietly within a lime tree. And they were also, shrieking at me. And I put my camera, in this thorny lime tree and thinking I would take a photo of whatever eggs were in there. And suddenly I saw two, these beaks that shot up, and I realized they were nestlings. And that's why the birds were shrieking at me. There's a sign, I was over in Wilmette at the Benai Center, and they have signs everywhere that says that the red-winged blackbirds are nesting here, and they will attack. I know of other people who have lacerations in their scalp that have come from other birds. So if you have that situation, wear a helmet.
And not Mickey Mouse ears.
No,
that feels like a bad choice. Question here, please.
Learning about your early curiosities about nature and your focus the past few years, how has your love for nature and birds in particular impacted your previous works?
Well, I have to say that I am somebody who's always loved nature. I was somebody who could identify Jeffrey Pine from A Christmas Wreath. I was not a beginner. I would go backpacking every year with my husband. That was all that we could afford. So I had that appreciation of being out in nature from the beginning. But what I began to see when you have close observation is that you see details. If you're very still, you see details, and then you start to see patterns, and you start to see behavior, and then you start to see sense and meaning. So if you can look at the same thing over and over again, over time, especially over time, a lot of these things will be revealed to you. It wasn't that I didn't like nature, it was that I came to deeply appreciate it by understanding the meaning of certain things, by being quiet and looking over many years.
Question here. Oh, we have a microphone I'm sorry. If the microphone's in the field here, let's.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming. I've been looking forward to you attending since May.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I got COVID.
That's okay.
I'm glad you all came out again.
Yeah, it was great anticipation, and then in between waiting for you here, I caught the 60 Minutes episode that you were on, and I was so anxious to look at the book, so when I got here, I immediately opened the book and was looking through the book, and I guess I didn't realize there were so many beautiful drawings from any of the prior information I had. Do you sell your illustrations?
Do I sell my illustrations? No. For the longest time, I never considered myself an artist. I still find it very difficult to when somebody says you're an artist, I think, because I did it for myself. And these drawings that I do feel very personal to me. It'd be like selling off something that I had created for my dogs, or because these are one of a kind. I'm not cranking them out as a product. Every drawing that I do is invested with deep feeling, not just ours, but a deep feeling for that individual that I saw. So I haven't done that, although there will be a note card line coming out by Barnes & Noble. They will not be originals, they will be reproductions, but there will be 25 birds in a set of 50 that you will be able to get next year. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. We have time for one more question, and it's going to come from right here.
You had mentioned the issues with bird strikes with windows, and I'm wondering if you have any advice as to the best way to prevent that.
Yes.
I just want to, bird strikes and windows and prevention of them.
And do I have any way to prevent that? I tried many different things in the beginning, including Halloween decorations. And you have to imagine the level of the house where I usually am, where it's the kitchen, the living room, my dining room, which is my desk, all on one level. It's mostly window on 3 sides, so 20-foot window length and 8 feet tall. So there's a lot of window, and what I see are the islands in the bay and the harbor, and a beautiful view. And what I decided to do, that I hated to see these birds killed, even one a year, that I looked for this solution. I put stickers on them. Ultimately, what I did was I found an acrylic water-based pen that was white, and I covered my windows with spider webs. I drew these spider webs. To some people, it looks like a gangster shot up my windows. To other people, they think it's beautiful. And that's what I felt I had to do. I think that there are other solutions. You can find window film and put that over the windows where the strikes happen most often. And I think that just the concern, just asking the question is really important, because we don't necessarily think there might be an answer. And there is. There are many different answers. If you go to the website of American Bird Conservancy, you will see some of these solutions and how they rank in effectiveness. They don't have my spiderweb solution on there. I'm going to try and have them, because the pen costs like $2 and you can do like 20 windows with it. You can take them off if you use elbow grease. You can, if you didn't do it perfectly, you can take it off. And you can see, I think it's in the book, how you do this pattern. And you just connect the lines, and kids can do it. It can be a great project for kids. But I have not had window strikes since then. I see these birds coming to the window because they see a reflection of some kind of greenery, and they think that they are heading toward greenery, and then suddenly they stop. It's like they put on the brakes and they turn and they go around. So it does work. And I wish you luck in finding something that works for you. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
So, stay put, because I have something I want to tell you. But before I do that, I just want to say, Amy Tan, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, people here.
So we have this tradition at the National Writers Series. I love this. We take a picture with the author and your books being held up. We're not going to do that right now. We're going to do that in just a second. So get your books ready. Make yourself pretty. You're all gorgeous. But before we do that, an announcement from Doug.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Amy, for an amazing evening. And there are still books for sale in the lobby if you haven't picked yours up yet. I want to say, come back June 25th. We'll have Jane Smiley on this stage for a wonderful conversation. We love your presence here. And again, thank you for such an engaging and uplifting
Thank you.
evening.
Thank you so much.